Hello everyone, DM Gashbad here. It has been a while since I've recorded one of these videos. I'm sorry about that. Summer is always a slow time for me as far as this goes. But the good news is that I am back, thank you for sticking with me, and I have a pile of battle reports to get through. And the great news is that they are not solo games. For the first time in a long time, I have a bunch of actual games that I've played against real people that I can bring to you guys. And the first of which is going to be a 6th edition Skirmish game. I set up this game a while ago to give a couple of prospective new players an introduction to the game, see how they like it, using models that I already have. This scenario is called Squig Hunters. In addition to the booklet for Warhammer Skirmish that they produced, they also released just a ton of skirmish scenarios on the GW website, and this one is taken from there. Conceptually, it's pretty straightforward. There's a cave, there's a bunch of wild squigs in it, and there are two rival teams of Night Goblins trying to gather up as many squigs as they can. There will be two sides in this game, neither of which are going to be controlled by me. I'm just going to be running the game. And each side is exactly the same. It consists of 6 Squig Hunters, 3 Night Goblins with nets, 3 Night Goblins with short bows, and 1 Night Goblin boss with a squig hunting tool and a net. It's played on a 3-foot by 3-foot table. Each team deploys in opposite corners in a 6-inch by 6-inch square. And once every team has deployed, each player gets to place one squig model anywhere on the table, so long as it's not within 12 inches of another goblin. There are a fair amount of special rules in this scenario, mostly pertaining to how you capture squigs. The squigs get their own turn after the 2-player turns, where they can bounce around. In the 6th edition game, the squigs don't explode once the squig herd breaks, instead they bounce in a random direction. So that's what they're going to do on their turn. If they land on opposing models, they attack it and then they bounce off again. In order to capture a squig, a Night Goblin has to first knock it unconscious. In order to do that, all they have to do is hit it in hand-to-hand combat. They don't have to wound it, they don't have to go to the injury charts, nothing like that, they just have to hit it. In addition, the Squig Hunters are considered weapon skill 9 for that, so they're going to hit it on a 3+. After a squig is unconscious, any goblin in base contact with it can have it move with it in the movement phase. And the goal is to get 5 of these squigs back into your deployment zone. On the squig turn, on the roll of a 1 on a d6, any unconscious squigs will wake up and bounce off. But if you use one of your net-armed goblins, if one of those guys is able to throw an attack on an unconscious squig in the hand-to-hand combat phase, then you can net it and it no longer needs to roll. Even if it wakes up, it won't bounce away and you can drag it around as much as you like. Finally, any Squig Hunter models within 12 inches of the center of the board can try to find new squigs. They just roll a d6, on a 4+, they can find a new squig. You roll a scatter die and it is placed 2d6 inches away from the center of the table in that direction. If you roll a hit, then you can place the squig wherever you want. So that's it, hopefully that made sense. Let's take a look at the two teams that'll be in this battle. First we have the Squig Hunters from my standard Night Goblin force, the Goblins of Orange Hollow. The Squig Hunters from this group are called the Squigkin Kings, and that is their boss up front there, Kaboom. Then we have the Squig Hunters from my Orc and Goblin force from Sylvania, the Court of the Grave Chappas. That unit is called the Squitch Hunters, and so those are those guys there with their boss, Mr. Grimm. And here we have the disputed territory of the cave full of squigs. The Squigkin Kings are in the lower right, and they'll be taking the first turn, and the Squitch Hunters are in the upper left. Both players chose to place a squig fairly close to their own side. The game will last a maximum of 15 rounds, so here we are on round 1 with the Squigkin Kings. As you see, they kind of spread out a little bit as they advance. They also managed to find one new squig as they approach the center of the table, and that's him, sort of in between the two original squigs. Then it's much the same with the Squitch Hunters, who also advance and find one squig of their own. That now brings us to the critter turn. The squigs bounce around. One of them ends up quite near both sides, and one of them explodes. If you roll a double on the 2d6 to see how far a squig bounces, then it gets too excited, it bonks its head on a stalactite or just gets overexcited and detonates. But whatever the reason, it's taken off the table and takes no further part. But now we're back to the Squigkin Kings, and they continue their advance up the table. One Squig Hunter does manage to charge the squig that bounced close to their lines on the other side of that set of stairs there, but he couldn't get any of his friends in that combat because that giant monster skull was in the way. The remaining hunters continue to prod open holes and cave mouths as they move towards the center of the table, and they find 3 new squigs, so now the table is pretty packed with those guys. In the hand-to-hand combat phase, the Squig Hunter does manage to roll that 3+ and knock that Squig unconscious. And now we're over to the Squig Hunters, who have a bunch of charges to make. 2 Hunters charge the Squig closest to the center of the table, and then 3 Hunters and a Netter charge the Squig closest to their lines. The rest of their guys advance towards the center of the table. They are slowed down a bit because now there are enemies within 8 inches, so they can't run. In the hand-to-hand combat phase, both Squigs are knocked unconscious. Unfortunately, we rolled randomly to see which model struck first since they all charged. Unfortunately, in the big combat, it was the Netter who went first, so he wasn't able to throw his net on an unconscious Squig and net it. So all the Squigs are currently unnetted and could wake up in the critter turn. And the critter turn is right now. Fortunately, none of the Squigs wake up. 3 of them just kind of bounce around, one all the way onto the left-hand side of the table, and one of them explodes. On to round 3 with the Squig Kings, and a giant mob of them charges the Squig closest to the center of the table. Looks like we've got 4 Hunters, 3 Netters, and the boss. The remaining Goblins move to the center of the table, except for the guy who knocked the Squig unconscious. He is dragging that Squig back to his deployment zone. But this turn we have a shooting phase. The Night Goblin archers have advanced close enough that they can actually start firing pot shots at the opposing Squig Hunters. It's a fairly challenging shot. They moved, they're at long range, and in Warhammer Skirmish you still get the -1 penalty for shooting at individual models that you do in the regular games of Warhammer. Nonetheless, one of those little archers does manage to get a shot through, wound the lead Squig Hunter on the other side, and stun him. In the hand-to-hand combat phase, unsurprisingly, the Squig is bonked unconscious and netted. One thing to keep in mind in the hand-to-hand combat phase is that nets work a little bit differently in 6th edition. Now they're actually thrown like a hand-to-hand combat attack that happens at the beginning of the hand-to-hand combat round, in the first round of combat. And if you hit, then the opposing model loses 1 attack. So now back over to the Squig Hunters. At the top, we have a Netter and a Squig Hunter charge that Squig over there. As the pack advances on their rivals, the Squig Kings, they manage to find another Squig lurking in the rocks. The 2 Squigs that they knocked unconscious earlier were both netted and dragged back towards their deployment zone, and they advance up their archers, but unfortunately they miss the rival Goblins. The one injured Squig Hunter flips over to just being knocked down, and in the hand-to-hand combat phase, the Squig is knocked unconscious. Unfortunately, the Netter is again the one who ended up striking first, so that Squig is not netted. In the critter phase, though, both of the unnetted Squigs managed to stay unconscious. The Squig that had bounded up on top of that big mountain in the north manages to explode, and the other just bounces to the bottom of the board. So over to the Squig Kings again, and there is a big advance. They're getting right into the Squig Hunter's face. The Squig that the big mob had beaten up is netted and dragged back towards the deployment zone, and the other Squig is actually dropped off, giving the lead of 1-0 to the Squig Kings. In the shooting phase, all the archers miss, but 2 more Squigs are found by the advancing Hunters. The Squig Hunters are a little bit more conservative in their movements. 1 Squig is dragged backwards and dropped off. 2 more are dragged back and netted, and another 2 Squigs are found. The archers again miss their targets, and the rest of the Goblins just kind of mill around a bit. In the Squig phase, nothing too dramatic happens. The Squig bounce around a bit, and then we are over to round number 5. And it's a big turn for the Squig Kings. There is a Squig that's very close to their own deployment zone, so that is charged by one of the Hunters, and then it's a big pile-in to their rivals. 3 Squig Hunters charge into 3 Squig Hunter archers. They all get stand-in shoots, but they all miss. 1 Netter charges a rival Hunter, another Netter charges a rival Netter. The archers advance up and try shooting at the Squig Hunter boss, but unfortunately they miss as well. And we move on to the hand-to-hand combat phase where we have 6 individual combats going on. First of all, the Squig Hunter with that nice weapon skill 9 against Squigs manages to knock out the 1 Squig that he charged. And then we're over to this giant pile of Goblins, and nothing much happens. Between the nets taking away attacks and just bad Goblin rolling, it's just a bunch of Goblins slapping each other and no injuries are caused whatsoever. It takes a little bit of infighting to warm up first before the long knives come out, I guess. So over to the Squig Hunters again. 2 Hunters are going to charge that Squig that's bouncing around inside their lines. A Squig Hunter charges a Squig King's Netter. Two of the squigs are dragged further back towards their deployment zone, and the boss can't really get through the big pile of bodies and so just kind of retreats. Mr. Grimm is not feeling in an especially brave mood today. With the archers all in combat, we go straight to the close combat phase. The Squig Hunters manage to knock out their target squig. And in the Goblin Brawl, a Squig Hunter Archer manages to stun a Squigkin King Hunter, and a Squigkin King Netter stuns a Squig Hunter Squig Hunter. And over to the critter phase, where none of the unconscious squigs wake up, and the remaining 3 squigs just kind of bounce around, happy enough to avoid the giant goblin combat over on the left. So it is a new round, and we are back to the Squigkin Kings. First of all, a Netter and 2 archers charge the most central squig. Kaboom decides that he's going to get into the mix, and he charges a Squig Hunter Squig Hunter in the big combat. And finally, the last archer decides that his bow isn't really doing the trick, so he's going to charge in to a rival Squig Hunter who is fighting one of his team Squig Hunters. In further moves, 2 squigs are dropped off into the Squigkin King's deployment zone, which is going to bring their score up to 3. They only need 5 to win. In hand-to-hand combat, the squig in the middle of the table is KO'd, but I believe still not netted. Still, that's pretty good because he was charging in with just archers and netters. None of those guys are weapon skill 9. He has to hit them on their basic roll of 4+. Otherwise, that squig can try and eat them in that round of combat. So it's good he got those hits through. And in this mess, stuff is starting to happen. The Squigkin King boss, Kaboom, manages to kill the Squig Hunter that he charged in against. One of his netters also manages to stun the rival team's archer. And the Squigkin King Netter that had stunned the hunter the round before makes him a casualty in this round. Again, I'm doing this the Mordheim way, where if you're in combat with a stunned model, then you can just take them off the table without having to roll anything. And if you're in contact with a knockdown model, you'll hit them automatically, and if you successfully wound them, then they are also made a casualty. Speaking of, we do have a Squig Hunter Archer that is in contact with a Squigkin King Hunter that was stunned the round before. He rolled over to just knock down, so all that Archer needed to do was to successfully wound him on a 4+, but he doesn't manage to do it. In a little bit of bright news from kind of a devastating turn for the Squig Hunters, a Squig Hunter Archer does manage to kill off the hunter that it's facing. Still, the Squig Hunters took 3 casualties in this round, and the Squigkin Kings took 1, so it was a bloody round of combat. But we are back over to the Squig Hunters to see what they can do. Mr. Grimm charges a Squigkin King Netter. A Squig Hunter Squig Hunter charges Kaboom, the Squigkin King boss. With some fancy handoffs, the Squig Hunters also managed to deposit 3 squigs in their deployment zone, so now they are up to 4 squigs captured. They only need 1 more to win. A Squig Hunter Archer is also free to go ahead and shoot. He takes aim at a nearby netter but misses, unfortunately. The archers do a little better in hand-to-hand combat though. A Squig Hunter Archer manages to kill the knocked down Squigkin King Hunter. In return, a Squigkin King Archer and Hunter get together and stun the one Squig Hunter Squig Hunter that they're fighting. And we are back to the squig phase. One squig goes and bounces off the table. Another one comes real close to landing on a Squigkin King Archer, but just misses him. And then we're back to the Squigkin Kings. In the Squigkin King's turn, the netter goes and nets and drags off that squig in the middle of the table, while his 2 archer buddies charge the squig that almost landed on them. The 2 Squig Hunters that had dropped off their captured squigs the round before go and move closer to the center of the table, and a netter charges an archer. With the Squigkin King Archers either dead or in combat, we move over to the close combat phase. Mr. Grimm, the Squig Hunter boss, knocks down the netter that he is fighting. In more bad news for the Squigkin Kings, a Squig Hunter Archer goes and kills the Squigkin King Squig Hunter that he was fighting. But in a bright spot for the Squigkin Kings, an Archer and a Hunter go and jump up and down on the knockdown Hunter until he dies. Over towards the center of the table, we have the 2 Goblin Archers that charge the one squig. Unfortunately, both of the archers miss. So finally, I get to roll some dice. I get to throw 2 attacks into these goblins that are trying to catch all my squigs. I put an attack on both of them, and both hit, so now it's Strength 5 versus Toughness 3, and I rolled double 1s. These are some well-trained Goblin Squig Hunters. I thought I was going to get to eat a goblin finally, but it was not to be. These goblins just dodged a giant toothy bullet. So now we're back to the Squig Hunter turn. One of their archers charges a Squigkin King Netter fighting another one of their archers. An archer charges in against Kaboom, the Squigkin King boss, currently fighting one of the Squig Hunter Squig Hunters. And the rest of the goblins just move towards the center of the table trying to find the last squig they need. Still no shooting, but another bloody round of hand-to-hand combat. The Squig Hunter archers that were fighting the Netter managed to kill him. But even worse, the charging archer coming in against Kaboom, the boss of the Squigkin Kings, manages to hit, wound, and kill him. So there goes the boss of the Squigkin Kings. In a tiny bit of good news, there is a Squig Hunter Netter and Mr. Grimm trying to stab the Squigkin King Netter who is lying on the ground. None of them actually managed to wound him, so he's at least a little safe. But that big dog pile has been kinda cleared out of the Squigkin Kings. In the Squig turn, the Squig that was fighting those two Night Goblin archers decided that they were a little bit too tough to chew, and so he just kind of bounces away a little bit. That then brings us to a new round, and we start with the Squigkin Kings. Unfortunately, they have lost over 25% casualties, and so they have to make a rout test. And at Leadership 5, unsurprisingly, they do not succeed, and so they turn tail and run. So there you have it. The Squig Hunters have chased off their rivals. They gathered up a bunch of squigs. They're feeling really good. The Squigkin Kings had done pretty well themselves. If the game had continued on, they might have been in a better position to actually drag back enough squigs to win the game. But still, pretty fun scenario. Lots of chaos, lots of people who are bad at fighting things they should not be fighting. A little bit rules heavy for an introductory scenario. When I was going over it, I was actually kind of surprised at all the little rules that you had to put out there regarding capturing and dragging squigs away and that kind of thing. Still, nice short game with even forces. I think I can safely recommend it to anyone who wants to try it out. Thanks for watching. Leave any questions, comments, concerns you have down below, and I will see you on the next one.